My name is Jessica Monroe, and this is the part of my life where a single word, no, saved me from drowning in someone else's debts. I grew up on the northeast side of Columbus, Ohio, in a cul-de-sac where every lawn was shaved to the same careful length and every dad knew exactly when to roll the bins to the curb. We were the kind of family people pointed to with warm approval at block parties. My father, Rick, a sales manager who wore optimism like a second tie. My mother, Elaine, an accountant who believed any mess could be reconciled if you just found the missing line item. And my brother, Tyler, 3 years older, born with the kind of smile that made teachers forgive late homework and neighbors forgive dented mailboxes. To outsiders, we looked fine. Better than fine. We looked together. Inside our front door, togetherness had rules it never admitted. Attention traveled like water downhill, toward Tyler, toward whatever latest thing Tyler wanted, toward Tyler's next potential, next season, next chance. I learned early how not to go thirsty. I learned to dig my own well. In 5th grade, I brought home a math certificate with a gold foil star in the corner. I set it beside Tyler's basketball schedule on the kitchen counter where big news lived for a few days before it either earned a spot on the fridge or sank into the drawer of unimportant things. Mom called from the minivan outside the gym, "Sweetie, we'll look at it later," and I believed her, then I waited, then I didn't. The paper curled. The star kept shining to an empty room. Something in me quietly rebudgeted hope. I got a job at Page and Pine Booksellers at 14. Dusty shelves. A bell that chimed like it had a cough. My first paycheck was $84.12 and felt heavier than the envelope deserved. I biked it straight to the Buckeye Community Credit Union and opened an account in my name, only mine, and learned, all at once, that control isn't about having a lot, it's about telling every dollar exactly where to stand. I started to like the sound of a future that listened to me. High school was measured in index cards and quiet victories. I didn't date much. I didn't go out much. I learned to love the echo of an empty house, the way it made room for concentration. When a scholarship to Ohio University arrived in my inbox, I didn't jump. I let out this long, unglamorous breath that felt like steam leaving an old radiator. Steady and necessary. The plan was working. Not spectacularly. Not storybook. But working. In Athens, I majored in finance and worked in the bursar's office, filing ledgers with a seriousness that made my classmates tease me in a friendly way. Budget queen, they called across study tables, and I would laugh because it wasn't wrong. I learned to portion my coffee and my energy. I learned the peace of seeing a number rise by exactly the amount you expected because you kept your promises to yourself. I opened a high-yield savings account and a modest brokerage, fed them both like small pets. I watched a slow, honest line creep up and to the right. For years later, I graduated debt-free, a phrase that tastes like cold water when you say it slowly. I moved back to Columbus to a studio in Grandview Heights, took a job downtown at a mid-sized firm as a junior analyst, and built a life that was unremarkable to anyone but me. A paid-off 2014 Civic. A budget that gave every dollar strict instructions. Sundays spent meal prepping in Tupperware that stained a little too easily. I wasn't performing discipline to impress anyone. I was practicing safety. By 27, the balance had crossed $50,000. By 29, it passed $100,000. When I hit $150,000, I didn't celebrate with a trip or a bag. I celebrated by sleeping through the night without waking to tally worst-case scenarios. That number wasn't just money. It was oxygen. It was a door that would open when I needed out. I didn't know how fast I'd need it. The Sunday everything cracked started like dozens of others. Mom's roast chicken. Dad's joke about the Buckeyes. Tyler at the table with a restlessness I recognized from every time he wanted something he hadn't earned yet. Halfway through the potatoes, he set his fork down like a gavel. "I need help," he said. "I'm down, a lot." "How much?" Dad asked, too quickly, as if the number could be absorbed by tone. Tyler rolled a toothpick between his fingers. 100. 100,000. The room felt suddenly full of other people's breath. Mom slid a folder across the table, papers with flags and signatures and a bright yellow highlight over cosigner like a spotlight over a trapdoor. "This would reset him," she said softly, like a nurse urging a pill down. Dad's eyes found mine. The look said obvious. The words followed. "You can do this, Jess." We pulled together. Something inside me, the old, trained part, stood at attention, ready to be useful. Another part, newer, steadier, stayed seated. I could see the last 10 years of small decisions lined up behind my shoulder like quiet witnesses. I could see the late nights, the extra shifts, the "no thanks, I'll brew at home." They weren't a stack of cash. They were a commitment. "I can't," I said. Tyler scoffed. "You think you're better because you hoard money?" I kept my voice low, like you do with an animal you don't entirely trust. "I think my future isn't collateral for your past." Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's mouth pressed into that accountant's line that means a discrepancy has been found. She tapped the folder. "This is family." "No," I said, "this is a loan, with interest I'll be paying in resentment for the rest of my life." Mom's next words were clean as cut glass. "Sign. Or don't come back." I left with my coat, my car keys, and a piece I didn't fully recognize. At home, hands shaking, I shut down everything I could shut down. Old joint account with Tyler from when we shared gas expenses? Closed. Two-factor authentication on every login? Enabled. I put my phone face down and let the lack of their voices ring louder than their voices ever had. By morning, there were 21 missed calls and a series of texts that used the vocabulary families reserve for emergencies and betrayals: selfish, disloyal, abandoning. If words could bruise, I looked like a peach dropped from a height. Around noon, a bank alert pinged, multiple failed login attempts on an old shared account. The timestamp sat like a fingerprint I didn't want to match. I changed everything again, then called my best friend, Tara, because sometimes the only way out of your own head is through someone else's patient ears. She met me at a small cafe that smelled like cinnamon and steam. I told her the table scene and the texts and the bank pings and the folder as if the folder were a person who had followed me home and stood in the doorway waiting to be fed. Tara let me speak until I could hear myself. Then she said the thing that became a plank in my new floor. "You're not refusing to help," she said. "You're refusing to enable." That word fit like a key. By Wednesday, Tyler had moved on to public opinion management, which is a formal way of saying he posted a subtweet that named no one and finger-pointed at everyone. "Some people have money but no heart," he wrote. The comments did what comments do. Old neighbors chimed in with nostalgia and judgment disguised as folksy wisdom. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years posted confusion as if it were kindness. I didn't respond. I didn't even doom scroll. I closed the app and went for a quiet run in the cold, the kind of run where your lungs argue and then, suddenly, they don't. The knock at my apartment door came on Thursday. I didn't need the peephole to know who it was. Dad first, because he always needed to arrive before a conversation to set its weather. Mom behind, holding the folder like a fragile baby. They didn't take off their coats. They didn't sit. "You will co-sign this mortgage," Dad said, voice clipped. I won't, I said, voice calm. You're choosing yourself over family, Mom said, voice breaking in the way that always activated my old training. I'm choosing a boundary, I said, and surprised myself by not crying. So maybe this is the first time I'm choosing my family the right way. Same thing, Dad snapped, and for a second I saw him not as a father but as a man panicking over a narrative he couldn't keep intact. He put the folder on my coffee table. He pointed at it like it might obey him. You'll regret this. They left. The apartment hummed. I stood very still until the adrenaline drained. When I could hear the regular sounds again, the refrigerator, the traffic, my own breath doing its ancient work, I opened my laptop to the most ordinary lifeline I've ever received. Email from James Park, an old colleague now at a firm in Denver, Colorado. Subject: would you ever consider a move? Inside, senior analyst opening. Significant salary bump. Relocation support. Culture that actually uses the word boundaries without smirking. You'd be perfect. Want to talk? I stared at the screen as if it were a window, because it was. I called. We talked. We didn't talk about my family because we didn't need to. We talked about problems I could actually solve. Numbers. Teams. A city ringed by mountains that made exits look like horizons instead of escapes. That night, Tyler called after midnight. The ringtone made my heart stand up too fast, like it was late for its own life. I answered because some patterns die hard. The voice on the line was my brother's mouth and the disease behind it. You owe me, he hissed. You owe us. I owe my own life, I said. I owe the woman who skipped dinners out and stayed late and said no quietly 1,000 times so she could say yes when it mattered. He cursed. I hung up. I wrote to James. I said yes. 2 weeks later, I stepped out of DN into air so thin it felt like a dare. The sky was a cheap magic trick, too blue, too wide, and it worked on me anyway. My apartment was a one-bedroom with scuffed floors and windows that made even my thrifted couch look intentional. On the second night, there was a storm that left the city rinsed and new, and I thought, if you're going to reinvent a life, you could do worse than a place that washes itself in the afternoon. Work didn't ask for permission to believe in me. James handed me a whiteboard marker and a problem, and I did what I know how to do. I found efficiencies. I built models. I told the truth about what the numbers were saying even when the truth wasn't flattering. The first time a client used the phrase, that saved us 7 figures, I went into a stairwell and let myself feel proud for the exact length of a flight and a half. Then I went back to my desk and did the next right thing. The funny part about competence is that you can forget how good it feels when you spend too long defending it. I made a rule for myself, heal on purpose. I found a therapist, Dr. Maya Ellison, whose office plants were alive and whose questions didn't lead me where she wanted to go, but where I clearly needed to walk. In the second session, she named the patterns like you'd name constellations for someone who'd only ever seen arbitrary stars. Parentification. Financial guilt. Enmeshment. Enabling. I wrote them down in my notes app not because labels fix anything, but because they gave me sightlines. A boundary, she said, is not a way to keep people out. It's a way to keep you in. I took that sentence home and taped it to my bathroom mirror like medicine you take by eye. On Tuesday nights, I started volunteering at a community center off Colfax, teaching teens about money. We talked budgeting, compound interest, the way marketing whispers you out of yourself. A girl named Marisol stayed late after the second class, tracing the interest curve with her finger. No one tells us this, she said, not mad, exactly, just newly sure she'd been robbed. They just tell us not to buy sneakers. Knowledge is leverage, I told her. Use it kindly on yourself. Be ruthless with the lies. Denver gave me friends the way some cities give you allergies, fast and hard. Lena from work dragged me to a rooftop salsa night where I laughed at my own feet. Owen from the next cube over introduced me to breakfast burritos so powerful I nearly called my past self to apologize for every small breakfast I'd tolerated. On Saturday mornings I learned the farmer's market smell of roasted chiles. On Sunday afternoons I learned the color the mountains turn when evening decides to keep you company. Then the text I had been expecting arrived like a formality you still hope won't materialize. Naomi, my cousin, they took out a second mortgage. They're behind. Creditors are calling. I'm sorry to be the messenger. I read it once. Twice. I put the phone face down and looked out at a city that didn't know my last name. Grief knocked. I opened the door, let it sit, didn't offer snacks. That's the trick with honest pain, you host it, you don't hire it. I texted back, thank you for telling me. I can't fix it. I added a heart because sometimes that's all you can ethically give. Weeks later, Naomi's update came with a photograph of a notice taped to my parents' front door, foreclosure printed with the ruthlessness of office fonts. Beneath it, the gray of the cement step where I had once knotted my first laces. Beneath that, Ohio dirt I did not recognize anymore. That night, I stood at my own window and watched heat lightning far out over the plains, silent and theatrical, the way certain truths are when you refuse to clap. I let the sadness come through in one long, cool wave. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed at a decent hour because healing is, embarrassingly often, in the bedtime. A letter arrived a week later. My mother's handwriting smaller, shaky, like the lines had lost confidence. 2 sentences. We lost the house. I don't understand you anymore. I set the paper on my counter beside a bowl of oranges and read it again, slowly, the way you read a riddle you're not going to answer. Then I said, to the room, to myself, to the part of me that still likes to audition for other people's understanding, I don't understand me yet either, and that's okay. Sometimes the kindest comprehension you can offer is to let confusion live without making it king. I didn't fly back. I didn't wire money. I didn't write a long, careful email that explained my entire life in 10 paragraphs designed to be forwarded to relatives who never learned to read without defending. I made lentil soup. I graded budgets for my class. I lifted a little heavier at the gym. I opened my brokerage app and made a boring allocation tweak that felt like an act of radical faith. I believe in future me enough to keep feeding her even on sad days. When the phone finally rang with a number I didn't recognize and Tyler's voice at the other end, it was flatter, smaller, like it had been ironed. I'm in a program, he said. They say I should make amends without asking for anything. He paused, as if waiting to be graded. I'm sorry. The apology hung like a coat on a hook, useful, but not a home. Old training told me to rush in with a promise. It's okay. We'll figure it out. I'll help. New training kept me quiet long enough to realize a miracle. The world didn't end when I didn't rescue it. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hope you keep going. Then I did something my former self would have considered cruelty and my current self recognizes as respect. I didn't ask what he needed. I didn't offer solutions. I let the ownership stay where it belonged. Spring turned Denver soft. Trees along 17th leafed out like they finally remembered something. I picked up a small second-hand bike and started making a messy loop of the city in the evenings, not for exercise, exactly, but for proof. Proof that you can be a woman alone on a bike at dusk and feel like a citizen of your own body. One Thursday I stopped on the Millennium Bridge just as the sun fell straight down the rails and turned every window into a gold plate. I caught my reflection in one of them and didn't look away. The woman looking back had laugh lines I'd earned and an expression I recognized. She trusted me. At work, we landed a client with a messy cost structure and an even messier ego. Old me would have tried to charm the chaos. New me named it simply and offered a handful of clean, implementable steps. They blinked. They blustered. They implemented anyway because even egos like to save money. When the results hit, James bought donuts and wrote Jess equals ROI on the conference room whiteboard. It was unprofessional and exactly right. On Tuesdays, Marisol started bringing a friend named Devin to class. They argued, in a respectful, nerdy way, about whether it was more powerful to cut expenses or increase income. I told them the unpopular truth: boring behaviors, done early and often, beat sexy windfalls 9 times out of 10. They didn't like it. They kept coming anyway. We drew charts. We shared numbers. We made financial plans that sounded like kindness instead of punishment. A year passed in the way good years do, in small increments that only look like transformation when you step back. I did not reconcile with my parents into a viral reunion at an airport. We did not hug under a departures board while strangers clapped. We had 2 phone calls that were careful and taut. We mailed each other a few postcards, the kind that prove you were somewhere and thinking of someone without asking either to change. I kept my boundary like you keep watering a plant you want to live, a little at a time, often, on schedule. Then, oddly, something like redemption arrived by email in the least dramatic format possible. A note from Mrs. Gaines, the woman who owns Page and Pine, the bookstore where I bagged novels and learned to breathe under dust. I heard from your mom that you're in Denver. We're visiting our daughter there next month. Any interest in coffee? I said yes because time is strange and because forgiveness sometimes wears a stranger's cardigan. We met at a cafe that leaned industrial and sweet. She asked about the market, I asked about the bell with a cough. We talked about inventory and about how different busy feels when you're surviving versus when you're choosing. On the way out, she squeezed my hand the way someone's aunt squeezes a niece she wishes were hers. You were always steady, she said. I'm glad someone, you, finally honored it. I walked home in that blue hour before the city remembers it's nighttime and thought about how people like to rename your virtues as flaws when they need something from you. Steady becomes stingy, boundary becomes cold, focus becomes selfish, and how deeply freeing it is to reclaim the original words. If you've read this far, maybe you're here because the folder is already on your table. Maybe the word family has been used like a crowbar on your locked safe. Maybe you've been told that love is measured by how easily you surrender your oxygen mask to the person who refuses to stop poking holes in the plane. I won't tell you what to do. I will tell you what I did. I said no. I kept my savings. I moved across the country for a job that asked for my brain instead of my obedience. I built Wednesday night routines and Saturday morning friendships. I learned that healing makes for boring montages: sleep, soup, spreadsheets, sunlight, the long walk home. I learned that you can miss people and not follow them into houses that are on fire. I learned that self-respect is not a luxury purchase. It's your rent, your groceries, your utilities. Pay it first or the lights go out. Months from now, I might accept a coffee with my mother. I might bring a list of questions we can answer without arguing. I might learn the parts of her story I've never asked, the pressures I couldn't see because I was busy surviving the consequences of them. Or I might not. Love is not a court order. Sometimes the most loving thing is to live well in view of someone who told you living well without their permission was betrayal. Sometimes the most loving thing is to move out of view. As for Tyler, I haven't heard his voice since the program voicemail. Naomi says he's working at an auto parts warehouse and paying cash for a small room. If that's true, I'm glad the math finally got honest. If it isn't, it's not my ledger to reconcile. People think revenge is a hot flash of triumph. Here's the cooler truth I found: restoration tastes better. Restoring your name to yourself. Restoring your plans to the person who made them. Restoring your future to the one who did the quiet work. It doesn't sizzle. It nourishes. If this story touched the part of you that keeps count, of dollars, of efforts, of little kindnesses you gave yourself in secret, tell me in the comments what you're choosing next. Not for spectacle, for solidarity. Tell the internet, sure, but tell you first. Tonight I will cook at home. Tomorrow I'll move the automatic transfer back to payday. Next week I will say no kindly and keep walking. Watch what compounds. Watch who you become when you keep promises that don't require an audience. And if you need a first step, start with this: 2 columns on a page before you sleep: what sustains me and what drains me. Add 1 item to the left column that you'll feed tomorrow, and 1 item to the right column that you'll starve. Repeat. Boring is beautiful when it saves your life. I'm Jessica. I chose my future. I hope, wherever you are, under a flat Ohio sky or a mountain of your own making, you choose yours too. And when someone slides a folder across a table and calls it love, remember, love doesn't need your signature. It needs your truth.